everybody. This is Gregory with 5 Minute Catholic Apologetics, where 5 minutes of your time may get you to the divine. Today we're going to talk about the Bible, its chapters, verses, and why it's in the order it's in. Now, before we begin, let's start with our prayer. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Gloria Patri et Filii et Spiritui Sancto, secutor principio et nunc et semper et saecula saeculorum. Amen. All right, I'm going to put banners in for this episode that cover the canonicity of the Bible. In other words, why and how the Catholic Church decided which books were going to be in the Bible. Today, we're going to talk about more of the kind of, we joke about like when Christ ascended into heaven, he didn't pass out Bibles with a table of contents in order. So the question is, well, when did all that come about? I think most Christians understand that the Bible did not come with a table of contents, chapter, and verses. But they never really think about, well, how did all this come about and when did it come about? And I would say this certainly with Catholics and Protestants alike, probably more with Protestants because a lot of evangelical Protestants are sola scriptura and feel like all I need to know about Christian living can be found in the Bible, even though the Bible never says that. And we've talked about that like in the 6-part episode series we have on refuting sola scriptura. But today we're just talking about like Bible verses and chapters. So the order of the Bible books. Let's just really focus on the New Testament. We've covered this on the Bible canonicity, how the early church already kind of had the order and the books of the Bible determined. There were some books that the early church, when I mean the first few hundred years, decided maybe wasn't or shouldn't be in the canon. This would be like Revelation, for example. There was some dispute about that. And then there were some extra biblical books that were decided that were not put in, like Shepherd of Hermes, some of Pope Clement's writings, and then certainly the Gnostic writings were never considered because the Gnostic writings were written several hundred years after the death of Christ. Whereas if you look at Shepherd of Hermes, the Didache, we have an episode here on Didache, Clement's writings, those were all around or a little after the time of the apostles. But already in the late 300s, with people like Athanasius, we already have the first surviving writings of the order of the Bible. And essentially the order of the New Testament is what it is today. And the order kind of makes sense. We have the Gospels based on the order that the church fathers thought that they were written. Then you have the Acts, which makes sense because it's like the sequel, right? It's the Empire Strikes Back. And then you have the Pauline letters. And the Pauline letters are pretty much based on the order of their length. So you notice like the longer ones like Romans and 1 Corinthians tend to be longer, then it goes shorter. And then after that, you're going to have the Catholic epistles or the universal epistles. Then you're going to have the ones written by John and Peter and so forth. And then it makes sense to have Revelation at the end because that's the more kind of prophetic looking into the future. Now, when it comes to chapters, so for the first 1,000 years of church history, which would be Catholic history and Christian history, because every Christian in the world for the first 1,000 years was Catholic, all the Bibles were written by scribes. Right? Scribes were writing them very slowly. You can see some of these kind of beautiful illuminated Bibles if you ever go to some of the libraries in America and certainly in Europe. There are tons of them, but they were all written, but they had no chapters. So they would have the books. Can you imagine reading Isaiah with no chapters, or Leviticus, or those super long, I don't mean to malign them, cumbersome books with no chapters? So the chapters came in 1,200 years after the time of Christ. Stephen Langton was a monk living in England. Some really nerdy historians would know that he helped broker the Magna Carta between the aristocracy and the pretty corrupt King John I, probably most remembered from the Robin Hood fame, but he existed in the early 1200s. And he was the one, Langton, who was the first one to put in chapters. Because, even then, all through this time, they kind of understood it makes sense to put in chapters because it's easier to find stuff. So he was the first one where it kind of stuck. So it was around 1200 AD. He was the first one who did it. Then later on, you had Robert Estienne, and he was a French man in the early 1500s. And he was the one who, and there were people who were putting in verses before that, but Estienne's was the first that was kind of the one that stuck, the one that kind of stuck, and the one that we have today. He started putting in the verses where they are today. And so that's why we have the verses. Now, of course, there's going to be some changes, some discrepancies since then, but these are like the kind of the titans of who did what. So you had Langton putting in the chapters around the 1200 AD, and then you had Estienne doing it, putting in the verses in the early 1500s. This, of course, would be put into the Vulgate, the Latin translation of the Bible, because certainly with Langton, that was the only one that was really in circulation. And when Estienne was around, at that point, you started having kind of the more vernacular translations, because we did already have the Gutenberg Bible, which was written by Latin, which was typed in Latin or printed in Latin by Gutenberg, who was a devout Catholic. Some people forget that the Gutenberg was a devout Catholic, because again, you look, he's in the 1450s when he did the first Bible. Everyone in Europe was Catholic. There were no Protestants in Catholic. In Europe, you only had the eastern part of the realm, and the southeast, I should say, more with the Greeks and the Russians that were Orthodox, but all of Central and in Western Europe were all Catholics. So when he created the movable print, the movable set and all that, and he was able to crank out some of the Bibles, of course it made a humongous difference, but he was certainly Catholic. And Estienne, who put in the verses, was a Catholic most of his life, and at the end of his life he did become a Protestant. Either way, we are greatly indebted to these people, because I could not imagine a Bible that did not have chapter verses. Hey, let's say, where's the story about the witch of Endor in I guess that'd be in 1 Samuel. Like, it's somewhere in the middle. I mean, you can imagine how hard that is. Or even like in the Gospels, I would suppose Matthew's probably the longest. I mean, just finding stuff would be such a pain, right? So we really owe it to these people that they put it in there. But in closing, like if you're ever talking to Protestants, just remind them, or lapsed Catholics, remind them that the Bible didn't come out of the sky with a table of contents, and remind them that the Catholic Church wrote the Bible, the New Testament. The Catholic Church determined the canonicity, what books were going to be in it and what books were not going to be in it, based on a criteria that church councils determine. We have videos on that. The Catholic Church, or people in the Catholic Church, determined what was the final canon. We talked about this with Council of Hippo, Council of Carthage in the late 300s, Council of Rome with Pope Damasus is kind of the first definitive list, and these are in the late 300s, early 400s. And then, final list you see in the Council of Trent in the 1560s after the Protestant Reformation. And then just remind them of those Catholics, Langton, for example, a Catholic monk in England, who put in the chapters. And then you had Estienne, who was at least a born Catholic. And when he did the Bible, when he put in the verses, as far as I know, he was still Catholic, who put in the verses. So the Bible didn't come manufactured as is. It took time, and all that was a work of Catholic patrimony and so forth. So just remind them of that. Guys, post in the comments. Love to hear from you. Please hit the notification, subscribe, and share with others. Until next time, take care. God bless and pray.